Welcome to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive. If you're someone who loves digging into what happens off the pitch as well as on it, well, you're definitely in the right place today.
Absolutely. Today we're tackling the money side of things. Always crucial.
It really is. We're looking specifically at the financial health and maybe more importantly, the future prospects of SA Rugby.
Yeah, and we've got some pretty solid detail to go on. Our main source here is an article from Planet Rugby. They did a good job breaking down the info shared at SA Rugby's recent annual meeting.
So we get a look at their financial report for 2024, but also their strategy, their projections going forward.
Exactly. Gives us a proper look under the hood.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive, we want to pull out the key numbers, obviously, but also understand the why behind them, what's the strategy, and look, what does this actually mean for rugby in South Africa? From the Bucks down to the local clubs.
It's quite a story, actually. There are challenges, sure, but also some, well, surprisingly positive news in there, too.
It really shows how the business side fuels everything else, doesn't it? It funds the big campaigns, the development, everything.
It's the engine room.
And speaking of getting the full picture, if this kind of insight into the business of rugby is your thing, make sure you hit subscribe to Rugby Obsession right now, wherever you're listening. Don't miss out on future deep dives like this one.
Definitely worth doing.
Okay, let's dive in. The headline news from this SA Rugby report, it's pretty eye-catching, especially when you see what's happening with other unions globally.
It really is. The big takeaway is that SA Rugby is forecasting a profit. A profit of over 100 million rand for 2025.
Which, for context, is around, GBP 4.1 million, give or take?
Yeah, about that. And what makes that number pop even more is comparing it to 2024. They actually started that year planning for a loss.
And they did report one, didn't they? About R93 million.
That's right, about GBP 3.8 million loss for the group. But, and this is the key bit from the report, a really strong start to 2025 has apparently already wiped that deficit out.
Yeah.
So they're looking firmly in the black this year.
Wow. Okay. And you mentioned comparing it globally. How does this stack up?
Well, this is where it gets pretty stark. This profit forecast really bucks the trend. The Planet Rugby article makes it clear lots of other major rugby federations are struggling, financially speaking.
Struggling how badly?
We're talking massive deficits. Some unions lost as much as R913 million, nearly GBP 38 million.
Good grief.
Yeah. And apparently 5 other Tier 1 nations, the big guns reported losses anywhere between R588 million and R181 million in their last report.
So hundreds of millions in losses for many, and SA Rugby is looking at a R100 million profit.
Exactly. The article even points out that the next best result among those peers was still a loss of R126 million, about GBP 5.2 million.
Okay, that really puts it into perspective. So the big question then is, how? How do they go from budgeting for and reporting a loss in 2024 to this turnaround, especially when others are, bleeding red ink?
Well, the report points to a major strategic decision they made and the cost that came with it.
Ah, you mean the move to the Northern Hemisphere competitions? The URC and the European Cups?
Precisely. Joining the URC and EPCR, SA Rugby's chief executive, Rian Oberholzer, acknowledged it came at a, quote, significant cost.
How significant are we talking?
The net cost just in 2024 was R124 million, about GBP 5.1 million. So yeah, a big chunk of change.
But Oberholzer defended it.
Very strongly. He's quoted saying it was absolutely the right thing to do despite that cost.
Why? What was the thinking?
The alternative, basically, was being potentially reduced to playing only domestic competitions. Isolation.
Which sounds like, a disaster, frankly.
He called it potentially catastrophic, both for high performance, keeping the players sharp against top opposition, and financially. Losing international exposure, broadcast value, sponsorships, all of it.
Okay, so it was an investment to stay relevant, essentially. A costly one, but necessary?
That's the argument. And they've been at it for a while, investing for the best part of 8 years, apparently.
Yeah.
The idea is that now, in 2025, as some initial obligations are met, they'll start to reap the on- and off-field rewards.
So the pain was front-loaded, hopefully.
Seems that way. Oberholzer doubled down, saying SA Rugby has annually outperformed our global peers since the pandemic, even while carrying this extra cost of the URC EPCR investment. It suggests they managed their core business well during that period, too.
Right. Okay. So that explains the big cost factor and the 2024 loss. But The profit in 2025, that R100 million plus, where's that coming from? It can't just be that the initial URC costs are easing off, surely.
No, it's more proactive than that. The report details specific changes they made on the commercial side. It sounds like a deliberate strategy kicking in.
Like what?
Okay, firstly, they apparently reformatted their offering to partners.
Meaning they repackaged sponsorship deals.
Sort of, yeah. It sounds like they looked at what they were offering, visibility, rights, access, enhance it, maybe added new things, and were then able to charge, well, enhanced values, better packages, better prices.
Okay, making their commercial assets work harder.
Exactly. And alongside that, they brought in a new commercial delivery model.
Which sounds a bit like corporate speak, but what does it likely mean in practice? A new team structure, different approach.
Could be all of those. Maybe being more targeted, using data better, changing how they actually manage and service those partnerships. It implies a more sophisticated and proactive commercial operation.
Right, not just waiting for the phone to ring, but actively going out and creating value, then selling it. And that's what's driving the 2025 profit forecast.
That's what the report directly attributes it to, yeah. That commercial reset bearing fruit this year.
Okay. But what about the underlying numbers in 2024? Even with the loss, was the business fundamentally healthy?
That's a good point. And yes, the commercial performance in 2024 was actually strong, despite the overall loss, which, remember, was budgeted. Commercial revenues broke R1.5 billion for the first time ever.
Over R1.5 billion. Wow, what was the exact figure?
R1.552 billion. That was up from R1.40 billion the year before, in 2023.
So decent growth. Not
Yeah.
7.8% increase?
Yeah. And importantly, like you alluded to, 2024 was not a Rugby World Cup year.
Right. Usually you'd expect broadcast money to dip a bit then.
But they still saw increased broadcast revenues, plus strong tournament sponsorships, and merchandising really took off.
How so?
Merchandising receipts more than doubled. Went from R30 million in 2023 to R62 million in 2024.
Doubled. Okay, that's huge. Must be the back-to-back World Cups effect combined with maybe better products or distribution.
Likely a combination, yeah. Shows real fan engagement. So add in the grants they received, mostly from World Rugby, and total income for 2024 hit R1.76 billion.
Which is what, about GBP 72.8 million? A serious amount of money.
Yep. And looking ahead, the forecast for this year, 2025, is for total revenues to break R2 billion for the first time.
R2 billion. Okay, so that R100 million profit isn't just cost control, it's built on serious revenue growth as well.
Definitely. But of course, there are always expenses. Total spending did go up slightly in 2024.
By how much?
It went from R1.816 billion in 2023 to R1.871 billion in 2024. So about a 2.9% increase. Not huge, but an increase nonetheless.
Yeah, the report breaks it down. Some key things were R133 million invested in hosting 3 World Rugby tournaments on home soil, age grade World Cups, maybe sevens events, that sort of thing.
Okay, investments in bringing big events to SA.
Right. Also, player image rights payments went up by R24 million, reaching R148 million total. That often reflects the players' growing value after successes.
Makes sense after winning the World Cup.
And there were costs, R13 million, linked to that private equity deal they explored, but which didn't end up happening as planned. Ah, okay. Transaction costs, essentially. And what about the really big spending areas?
Well, that investment in the URC and EPCR, the total cost attributed to participating was R446 million in 2024. That's travel, fees, everything involved.
Still a massive number. And
Yeah.
the Springboks themselves.
Spending on the Boks and the other national teams came in at R433 million.
So, similar scale to the Northern Hemisphere costs.
Pretty much neck and neck. But interestingly, that R433 million was actually down R27 million compared to 2023.
Which makes sense, I suppose. 2023 was the World Cup year, all the costs associated with that massive campaign.
Exactly. But even with all these significant costs, particularly the URC EPCR investment, the report highlights something important.
What's that?
They were still able to make their full distribution payments to the member unions.
Ah, okay. That's crucial, isn't it? That's the money that filters down to the provinces, the clubs, keeps the lights on across the country.
Absolutely vital. Shows they managed to protect that funding flow despite the other pressures.
Let's circle back to that 2024 loss for a second. Oberholzer had that quote. Something like being satisfied despite reporting a loss seemed odd at first glance.
Yeah, reporting a loss can never be desirable. But the irony is that we are more than satisfied with our position. That was it.
So what's the context there? Why satisfied with a loss?
Because, as we touched on, it was budgeted. They went into 2024 expecting to make a loss of roughly that size.
And they expected to cover it with money from that private equity deal.
That was the plan, yes. Selling a slice of their commercial rights to bring in a chunk of capital.
But the deal didn't happen, or at least not as planned, so what did they do? Panic. Cut everything.
Nope. According to Oberholzer, they basically stuck to their plan B. They continued with our planned commercial reset and other revenue generation plans.
The things we talked about earlier, repackaging deals, the new delivery model.
Exactly. And crucially, he says those plans have borne fruit, which is why they're now forecasting that profit for 2025. They found another way to plug the gap, and then some.
That shows some resilience sticking to the strategy.
It does. And it leads to another really key point highlighted in the report, something that puts SA Rugby in a, well, pretty enviable position globally.
Which is?
They're still debt-free.
Completely debt-free in professional rugby.
Apparently so. Oberholzer calls it a very rare position among our international peers.
Wow. That is rare. So many other unions are carrying significant debt burdens, right?
Huge amounts in some cases.
Yeah.
Being debt-free gives SA Rugby enormous flexibility. They're not constantly servicing debt. They have more freedom to invest, to ride out bumps on the road. It's a massive strategic plus.
Speaks volumes about their financial management over the longer term, I guess.
It seems so. Fiscal discipline paying off.
Okay, so the turnaround in 2025 looks strong. They're debt-free. What about beyond this year? Does the report give any clues about the longer-term outlook?
Yeah, the vibe is positive. They're forecasting strong revenues for 2026 as well. And there's mention of new tournament formats in the pipeline, which they expect will boost income further.
New formats. Could be anything, I suppose. Club World Cup, maybe? Changes to international windows?
Could be. The details aren't there, but the expectation is clearly more growth.
Which brings us back to the crucial question for you, our listener, especially if you're involved in rugby in South Africa at any level. Where does all this money, the R2 billion in revenue, the projected profit, actually go?
And Oberholzer is very direct about this in the report. He states clearly, the income that SA Rugby generates all goes back into supporting the growth and promotion of rugby in the country.
So it's not just sitting in a bank account.
Not according to him. He lists where it goes. Funding the Springboks, obviously keeping them competitive, critically expanding women's rugby programs.
Yeah, that's huge. Vital for the future.
Absolutely. Also fueling the other national teams. Sevens, the age group sides, paying for the member unions' activities, the provinces, the community work.
What else?
Underwriting safety stuff like the Bokke Smart program. Supporting referees, coach development, funding the age group competitions, development pathways.
Finding the next generation of talent.
Exactly. And enabling the big events. People enjoy the test matches, the domestic comps. It's a long list.
It really covers the whole spectrum, doesn't it?
It seems to. Oberholzer wraps it up nicely. Ultimately, every rand that we earn goes into powering the game in some shape or form. After a challenging 2024, we have a good news story to tell our South African rugby community as we look ahead.
It paints that picture, doesn't it? Commercial success at the top, directly feeding investment all the way down the pyramid.
A virtuous cycle, if you like.
Yeah.
The success of the Bokkes drives commercial revenue, which then gets reinvested back into the structures that produce future Bokkes and support the whole game.
So that's our deep dive into the numbers and the strategy behind SA Rugby's finances. It really is a story of, well, strategic risk with that Northern Hemisphere move, navigating some tricky patches like the budgeted loss and the PE deal not quite going to plan.
But ultimately executing a commercial turnaround that seems to have put them on a really strong footing, especially compared to their peers.
And critically, allowing them to keep funding the game across the board.
Yeah, it's definitely a positive story coming out of South Africa, financially speaking, which isn't always the case we hear in World Rugby lately.
So, listening to all this, the strategy, the numbers, the debt-free status, the reinvestment, what really stands out to you? Does this change how you view the future of rugby in South Africa? We'd genuinely be interested to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, let us know. Your perspective is valuable.
And hey, while you're thinking about that, if you want to keep getting these kinds of insights and stay connected with the rugby obsession community, now's a great time to hit that subscribe button. Don't miss out.
It really underscores how vital that financial stability is, doesn't it? It's not just about balancing books.
No, it's the foundation for everything else. Growing the women's game, player safety, coaching.
Yeah.
You need the resources.
You absolutely do. Investment is key.
Which leads to a final thought to leave you with. Considering how explicitly SA Rugby links its revenue generation back to funding all levels of the game, from those World Cup winning Springboks right down to grassroots development, does this model, this performance, set a kind of benchmark for how other rugby unions globally should operate?
It's a compelling model, isn't it? Especially being debt-free while doing it. Many others would surely look at that with a bit of envy right now.
Definitely something to ponder. Don't forget to subscribe to Rugby Obsession for more deep dives into the world of rugby.
Thank you for listening to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive, and we will look forward to you listening to our next episode.